You know, you've probably been carrying your body around like a broken suitcase. Just think about that for a second. We treat our physical form like this heavy, inconvenient piece of luggage we're forced to drag through the bustling airport of life.
Right. Just dead weight.
Exactly. We are entirely up in our heads, staring at the departure board, stressing over the itinerary, obsessing over delays, and the body is just trailing behind us.
And we really only glance back at that suitcase when, a wheel violently snaps off or the zipper finally bursts. We completely ignore the structural integrity of the bag until there's a catastrophic failure.
Until there's chronic pain.
Yeah, chronic pain or systemic exhaustion or a full-blown panic attack.
But then you encounter the source materials for today's deep dive, and you realize the luggage isn't luggage at all. You're actually living inside a highly advanced biological supercomputer, and you've spent your entire life completely ignoring the dashboard.
It's quite a realization.
It really is. So, welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. For you, the learner out there, we promised a shortcut to being well-informed without all the overwhelm. Today's mission is a double feature on Group 7, specifically diving into chapters 22B, 23, 23B, and 24.
The heavy hitters.
Yeah, the really dense stuff. Our core mission today is to explore what the texts call embodied resonance, that magical coffee cup moment where practice becomes presence and the body and mind finally sync up into perfect harmony. We've got a stack of sources ranging from audio transcripts to dense architectural guides on the symphony of becoming and meta operating systems.
There's a lot to get through.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the transition the sources outline is profound. It's the shift from just accumulating mental frameworks, collecting spiritual tools in a shed, to actually unlocking the door and living in the house of your own being.
And the core obstacle preventing us from doing this is a phenomenon the text labels the myth of practice.
The myth of practice. Which, I am so guilty of this. It's this trap where we treat embodiment like a completely isolated chore on a to-do list, like going to the gym for your soul.
Right. You sit on a meditation cushion for 20 minutes. You set a timer in your phone.
Yep, do your cyclic breathing.
You check a box that says, okay, did my wellness routine. And then you stand up and spend the remaining 23 hours and 40 minutes of your day as a completely disembodied, stressed out maniac.
Totally reactive, just yelling at traffic.
Exactly. Which fundamentally entirely misses the point of the practice. The architecture of these teachings insists that the goal is not to be deeply embodied while sitting quietly in a perfectly temperature-controlled room with your eyes closed.
That's the easy part.
Right. The goal is to be embodied while you are actively living, while you're navigating a difficult conversation or cooking dinner or caught in that traffic.
And the reason we struggle with this integration, why we constantly default to living up in our heads, comes down to the raw processing power of our systems. The data provided in the text on this is absolutely staggering.
It's mind-blowing, honestly.
Yeah.
We have to look at the massive chasm between the conscious mind and the physical body.
Yeah, lay that out for us.
So the processing disparity is the key to understanding human behavior. The conscious mind, essentially the prefrontal cortex, that narrating voice inside your head, interpreting these words, deciding what emails to answer, it processes information at a rate of roughly 40 bits per second.
Just 40 bits.
40 bits.
To put that in perspective for you listening, that is practically dial-up internet from 1995. It's incredibly slow and highly constrained.
Highly constrained. It can only hold a few variables at a time. But beneath that, your entire nervous system, the biological supercomputer of your body, is processing 11 million bits of information per second.
11 million.
Every single second.
It's an almost incomprehensible volume of data. It's constantly mapping the micro tremors in the vocal cords of the person you're speaking to.
Yeah, registering the ambient temperature shifts on your skin.
Tracking the exact volume of oxygen in your bloodstream. Monitoring the fascial tension in your lower back. And perhaps most importantly, it's instantly cross-referencing all of this real-time sensory data against the cellular memory of every similar interaction you have ever had in your entire life.
That continuous 11 million bit stream is the raw, unfiltered feed of reality. And this vast computational difference, 40 bits of conscious thought versus 11 million bits of somatic processing, it completely demystifies a concept our culture usually treats as mystical or supernatural.
You're talking about intuition.
I am. Intuition isn't magic.
Right. It's not a psychic gift or a cosmic download. It's just math and biology working at a scale the conscious mind cannot comprehend.
When you feel a sudden, inexplicable urge to avoid a certain street, or you instantly distrust someone you just met despite them saying all the right things, that isn't a magical premonition.
It's the supercomputer.
Exactly. That is your 11 million bit supercomputer spotting a complex pattern in the environment, maybe a micro expression of contempt on a face, or a specific postural cue, and synthesizing all that massive data into a single, highly compressed warning signal.
It's exactly like a massive corporate research and development department. You have thousands of analysts crunching millions of data points on consumer behavior, supply chain vulnerabilities, all of it. And after weeks of processing, they send a single one-page memo up to the CEO.
And the CEO is the 40-bit conscious mind.
Right. And the memo just says, do not acquire this company. The CEO doesn't see the millions of data points, they just get the final directive. Intuition is the 99.9996% of reality that your body captured, which your brain simply hasn't had the time to articulate into linear language yet.
That's a great analogy.
But if we look at human behavior, we hit a massive contradiction here. If the body is so smart, if my body is this 11 million bit supercomputer, why do we constantly override it?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Why do I ignore the tight chest telling me not to take on a new client? Why do I eat a sleeve of heavily processed cookies when my stomach is actively sending signals that it feels terrible? The CEO is completely ignoring the brilliant R&D department.
Well, the biological mechanism driving that stubborn override is something the text defines as dimensional homonymy.
Dimensional homonymy. Sounds dense.
It does, but to understand it, we just have to look at how the brain actually functions inside the skull. The brain is locked in a dark, silent, bony vault. It has no direct access to the outside world. It relies entirely on electrical signals coming up from the body's sensors.
So it's essentially flying blind, trying to guess what is happening based on a radar screen.
Precisely. And because the brain is an energy hog, it consumes a massive amount of the body's calories. It tries to save energy by using predictive coding.
Okay.
Instead of analyzing every new situation from scratch, the 40-bit mind takes a raw sensation from the body and rapidly searches its database of past experiences to slap a label on it. It guesses.
Got it.
But a homonym in linguistics is a word that sounds exactly the same, but has different meanings based on context, like bark on a tree versus the bark of a dog. Dimensional homonymy means our internal physical sensations operate the exact same way.
Ah, so the raw physical data is identical, but the mind assigns a completely different dimensional meaning to it.
Let's look at the physiological state of readiness. Your body initiates a cascade of sympathetic nervous system arousal. Cortisol and adrenaline hit the bloodstream. Your heart rate accelerates to pump more oxygen to your muscles.
Your palms sweat to increase grip.
Right. Your breathing becomes rapid and shallow.
Yeah.
That is the biological reality, the raw 11 million bit data.
And the text gives a brilliant dual scenario for this. Imagine you're standing outside a boardroom, waiting to walk in for the most important job interview of your career. Your body initiates that exact cascade of adrenaline and increased heart rate.
And what does the 40-bit mind do?
It panics.
Yes. It uses an old childhood script. It feels the intense energy and instantly slaps the label panic on it. It says, oh no, I am failing. I am terrified. This is anxiety. You collapse all that rich, sophisticated physiological readiness into a rigid state of fear.
But if you take that exact same physiological stack, the racing heart, the sweaty palms, the rapid breathing, and you put yourself in the seat of a massive roller coaster, slowly clicking up the first major drop alongside your best friends.
Your mind interprets that data completely differently.
Right. In the roller coaster cart, the 40-bit mind slaps the label excitement on the exact same sensations.
The raw somatic data didn't change by a single bit. The biological reality is identical. The body is simply powering up because it recognizes that the upcoming event requires immense focus and energy. It's offering you metabolic support.
But when the lazy predictive mind mislabels that support as panic, it initiates a secondary cascade of psychological resistance.
Yes, you start fighting your own nervous system. You try to force your heart to slow down, which only creates more friction and actually induces real panic.
You're treating your body's attempt to help you as an active attack. Overcoming the myth of practice means catching the 40-bit mind in the act of predictive coding. It means developing the sensory literacy to feel the racing heart and the tight chest and saying, my body is giving me the energy I need for this interview, instead of immediately buying into the narrative of anxiety.
And this leads to a profound behavioral shift. What's fascinating here is that when you stop fighting your internal sensations, you fundamentally alter how you interact with external stimuli. The sources refer to this altered interaction as embodied disruption.
Embodied disruption, and it is incredibly relevant to how we navigate our modern, technologically saturated environment.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we live in an ecosystem of digital interfaces. We don't need to explain the basics of algorithmic monetization here. We all know that social media platforms and news feeds are engineered by thousands of behavioral psychologists to bypass our rational filters.
They're designed to hijack the nervous system directly. They manufacture artificial urgency to trigger the sympathetic nervous system. They want to simulate a predator in the bushes so that you freeze, dilate your pupils, and keep scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you are fully integrated, when you're living in the 11 million bit processing power of the body, you introduce a disruption into that algorithm.
I want to paint the picture of what this actually feels like biologically. Let's say you open an app. The algorithm serves up a piece of outrage bait, a highly polarized, infuriating headline designed specifically to hit your psychological triggers.
We've all been there.
Right. Before integration, before you learned sensory literacy, you were living entirely in the 40-bit conscious mind. That mind loves a narrative, it loves drama, so it takes the bait. You fall into a trance, your posture collapses, you stop breathing deeply, which is a phenomenon known as screen apnea.
That's a real thing, yeah.
And you spend 45 minutes doom scrolling through toxic arguments. You are functionally separated from your physical form.
But once you establish embodiment, the entire interaction changes. You open the app, you see the exact same engineered headline, but instead of jumping into the cognitive narrative, you instantly feel the fascial response in your tissue.
You literally feel the physical contraction. You feel your jaw clench. You feel your shoulders internally rotate. You notice your diaphragm freeze and your breath become shallow.
And because you're tuned into the dashboard, that contraction is experienced as physical discomfort. It physically hurts to consume junk content when your sensory pathways are clear. The algorithm is screaming at you, the world is ending, be terrified, attack the other side. But your body, which is fundamentally anchored in the present tense, checks its immediate environment.
The body does a real-time sweep. It says, hold on. I am sitting on a soft chair in my living room. The ambient temperature is 72 degrees. I have food in the kitchen. There is no predator here. I am biologically safe.
The internal somatic authority overrules the artificial digital urgency. The body acts as a literal grounding rod. You feel the uncomfortable tightening in your chest caused by the feed, and your nervous system naturally prompts you to remove the toxic stimulus. You just close the app.
It's a biological ad blocker, and what I find so liberating about this is that it completely redefines our concept of willpower.
How so?
Well, we usually think of resisting bad habits, whether it's toxic social media, highly processed junk food, or engaging with manipulative people as a function of discipline. We think we need a stronger 40-bit conscious mind to force ourselves to behave.
Right, just power through it.
But cognitive willpower is a highly finite resource. It relies on glucose. It suffers from decision fatigue. By 8:00 p.m., your 40-bit CEO is exhausted and will cave to whatever impulse is loudest.
But the body's feedback loop doesn't suffer from decision fatigue. It's a continuous, automatic 11 million bit stream. When you are embodied, you don't need ironclad discipline to stop eating foods that harm you because your stomach and your energy levels immediately register the lethargy and inflammation.
Yeah, the body says, this feels like poison, and the desire simply drops away.
You aren't resisting the cookie. The cookie ceases to be appealing because you can feel its actual effect on your tissue.
You just follow the physical ouch and move away. It's effortless. So what does this all mean, practically speaking? If the biological supercomputer is this powerful, and if accessing it provides this automatic filtering system for our lives, how do we actually log into it?
Right. How do we get there?
If someone has spent 30 years living entirely in the 40-bit mind, treating their body like luggage, how do they reestablish the connection?
The sources provide a highly specific architectural roadmap for this reconnection. It is detailed in the text as the five-fold path. This isn't a list of vague philosophical ideas. It's a sequential biological protocol for bridging the mind's cognitive melody with the body's autonomic rhythm.
Okay, let's break that
The
down.
first step on this path is sensation.
Sensation, and the texts are careful to distinguish this from merely thinking about your body, right? Sensation is about granular interoceptive awareness. It's reading the raw data without the narrative.
Yes. We have millions of nerve endings constantly sending data regarding thermal gradients, pressure, proprioception, and visceral states. Sensation is the deliberate practice of dropping the spotlight of your attention down into those pathways. For instance, without moving, can you feel the precise volume of space that your right foot occupies inside your shoe?
Wow, okay.
Can you feel the specific tension mapping across the muscles of your scalp?
It demands that the 40-bit mind stop talking for a second and just listen. It's rebuilding the baseline vocabulary of the physical form. Once you establish that basic sensory language, the fivefold path moves to the second component, breath.
Breath is biologically unique. It is the only vital function that sits precisely on the border between the autonomic nervous system and the volitional somatic nervous system.
Meaning it happens entirely on its own. You don't have to remember to breathe while you sleep, but the moment you choose to, you can take manual control of it.
And that manual control is the back door into the supercomputer. You cannot consciously command your thyroid to produce more hormones. You cannot explicitly command your heart rate to drop from 120 beats per minute to 60. But you can consciously command your diaphragm to expand slowly, extending your exhalation.
And because the respiratory system is inextricably linked to the vagus nerve, the massive cranial nerve wandering from your brainstem down through your viscera, that slow exhalation mechanically stimulates the vagus nerve.
It physically massages the vagus nerve, which sends a chemical signal, acetylcholine, directly to the heart, applying the vagal brake and forcing the heart rate to slow down.
It's like a biological hack. The brain interprets that slowed heart rate and realizes, oh, we must be safe because we're breathing like someone who is safe. Breath is the steering wheel for your biochemistry. It is how the mind proves to the body that the environment is secure.
Exactly. So we have sensation as the vocabulary and breath as the steering wheel. Step 3 is movement. But again, the texts are explicitly not talking about just going to a spin class.
Far from it. Much of modern exercise is highly disembodied. You can run on a treadmill for an hour with headphones blaring, staring at a television screen, completely disconnected from the biomechanics of your joints.
That builds cardiovascular endurance, but it does not build embodiment.
The text focuses on movement as the processing of stuck metabolic energy. Emotions aren't just thoughts, they're physiological events. When you get angry, your body prepares to fight. If you suppress that anger because you're in a professional meeting, that massive influx of kinetic energy doesn't just vanish.
Right, it gets trapped in the fascial network. The fascia, the connective tissue wrapping every muscle and organ, literally thickens and hardens to hold that unexpressed tension.
Movement, in the context of the fivefold path, is conscious, dynamic unwinding. It's moving with deliberate awareness to locate those areas of fascial restriction and essentially wringing out the metabolic waste of past emotional reactions. It's a biological clearing of the cache.
Which naturally requires the fourth step to balance it out. Stillness.
Stillness. Because of the signal-to-noise ratio?
Yes. Modern life is an endless barrage of hyperstimulating noise. If you are always moving, always listening to audio, always optimizing your time, your nervous system is constantly reacting to external inputs.
And if you never lower the noise floor of your environment, you can never hear the subtle internal baseline of your own system. Neurologically, stillness allows the brain to shift away from the task-positive network, the part of the brain constantly solving external problems, and activate the default mode network,
Which processes internal states, consolidates memories, and allows the nervous system to run a diagnostic on itself. Stillness isn't doing nothing. It's actively creating the acoustic environment necessary to hear the 11 million bit feed.
It's like pulling the car over and turning off the engine to hear if the belts are whining.
Exactly. And that brings us to the fifth and final step of the path, which is perhaps the most heavily suppressed in modern culture: expression.
You can be highly sensitive to your internal state. You can breathe perfectly. You can stretch your fascia and sit in profound stillness. But if you do not allow the body to express its genuine impulses, you remain structurally fragmented.
Because expression completes the biological stress cycle. When an animal in the wild survives a predator attack, it doesn't just calmly walk back to the herd. It physically shakes violently for several minutes. It vocalizes. It discharges the massive sympathetic nervous system arousal so it doesn't get trapped in the tissue.
Humans, however, have evolved highly restrictive social protocols. We experience a massive trauma or an intense stressor, and we force ourselves to look perfectly composed. We swallow the energy. We suppress the urge to cry, to shout, to tremble.
The text is brutal about the consequences of this. It argues that chronically compressed energy is the precursor to systemic physiological illness. Expression is the release valve.
It's granting your body the permission to laugh from the belly, to sob without holding the breath, to physically shake out the hands after a terrifying presentation. It's allowing the production studio of the body to actually broadcast its reality.
When you integrate all 5 of these steps, sensation, breath, movement, stillness, expression, you align the neural pathways. You remove the friction between the 40-bit processor and the 11 million-bit supercomputer. And this leads us to the ultimate architectural milestone in the text: embodied resonance.
This is what everything builds toward. The texts describe this phase not as something you do, but as a baseline state of how you are. I call it the coffee cup moment, based on a very specific, incredibly grounded narrative the sources use to illustrate the shift in chapters 23 and 23b.
It is a vital narrative. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it strips away all the mystical, esoteric baggage we usually attach to concepts of non-duality or enlightenment.
Exactly. The text describes a traveler who has been implementing this five-fold path. It's a random Tuesday morning. The traveler is standing in a somewhat messy, unremarkable kitchen. They aren't on a meditation retreat in complete silence. They aren't in a yoga studio.
Just normal life.
Yeah, they're just standing there in their pajamas, holding a cheap ceramic mug of coffee. But in that entirely mundane moment, the fundamental architecture of their perception shifts.
The boundary between the observer and the observed collapses.
Let's really look at what that means neurologically. Normally, there's a narrator in your head. You hold a cup of coffee, and the 40-bit mind says, "This cup is warm. The coffee smells like dark roast. I need to drink this quickly so I can get to work." You're trapped inside your skull, looking out at the world as if through a window, constantly commenting on the data.
You're experiencing reality with a cognitive delay. You're living a fraction of a second in the past, analyzing what just happened.
But in the coffee cup moment, that narrator simply turns off. The boundary becomes fully permeable. The traveler isn't thinking about the warmth of the ceramic. Their consciousness merges with the thermal reality of the heat. They notice the precise geometric angle of the morning light hitting the dust motes over the counter. They experience the olfactory cascade of the roasted beans without needing to label it good or bad.
The text defines this using a highly specific structural term: saturated synergization. It is the phenomenon of eliminating the quarter-second gap.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that quarter second, because this is where the biology is absolutely fascinating.
Human perception typically oscillates between 2 distinct networks: the task-positive network, which allows you to perform an action like pouring the boiling water over the coffee grounds, and the default mode network, which reflects on the action. You act, and then a quarter-second later, you judge the action. Perceptive participation followed by receptive participation.
Like, you play a chord on the guitar, and a fraction of a second later, you judge whether you played it correctly.
Exactly. But saturated synergization is the rare neurological event where these 2 modes fire simultaneously without the quarter-second delay. You achieve dual participation, you are entirely immersed in the physical action, and simultaneously fully receptive to the awareness of the action. You are playing the music and hearing the music with 0 cognitive friction.
The friction of the self dissolves. And the text makes a striking claim here. It states that achieving this saturation point, even for a few seconds while holding a coffee cup, creates more genuine structural neuroplasticity than 10 years of rigidly forcing yourself through a rote meditation practice while your mind wanders.
Because it's the moment the practice actually rewires the baseline state of the organism. You realize that you do not have a body as a possession. You are a body seamlessly integrated into the environment.
And to prove that this state isn't fragile, that it doesn't shatter the moment you leave the quiet kitchen, the text tests this in the ultimate high-stress somatic laboratory, the morning's subway commute.
Ah, the subway. It's the perfect gauntlet for testing embodied resonance because it's a profoundly chaotic sensory environment.
Think about the before integration version of a subway commute. The unintegrated person walks down those stairs, and their nervous system is instantly overwhelmed. The screeching metal of the train wheels is physically jarring. The fluorescent lights are flickering. You're packed shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of stressed, exhausted strangers. The environment is objectively hostile to the nervous system.
So what does the unintegrated person do? They initiate a massive somatic contraction. They physically shrink their fascial net. They shove earbuds in to block the audio. They stare blankly at a screen to block the visual input.
She's shutting down.
They try to forcefully sever the connection between their 40-bit mind and their 11 million-bit environment because the data stream is too painful.
It's pure survival dissociation. But the traveler who has achieved embodied resonance walks onto that exact same train, into that exact same chaos, and the experience is fundamentally transformed.
Because they no longer fear the sensory input. They do not need to contract.
Right. They might still choose to wear headphones, but they aren't using them as a shield to dissociate. The embodied traveler stands on the train and allows the data to flow through them without resistance. They feel the kinetic sway of the train car traveling up through the soles of their shoes and allow their knees to absorb the shock rhythmically.
They notice the heavy, stale smell of the ozone. They observe the micro-expressions of exhaustion on the faces of the commuters across from them.
They are fully present in the chaos without being destabilized by it. And this realization transitions the source material from an internal, personal focus to a massive external application. Because when you can maintain that level of resonance in a crowded space, you are no longer just affecting your own biology.
Which brings us to chapter 24.
Yes, here's where it gets really interesting. The relational field and co-regulation. Because up until now, this could all sound like a very selfish endeavor, just me feeling perfectly zen with my coffee and my subway ride. But the biology of the nervous system makes it physically impossible for personal integration to remain isolated.
Humans are fundamentally entirely interconnected on a biological level. Your internal state unavoidably alters the external field.
The sources illustrate this through a brilliantly recognizable scenario. You meet a friend at a busy cafe, they sit down across from you, they let out a sigh, and they deliver the standard socially acceptable script. They say, "I'm fine, just a busy week."
If you are operating entirely from the 40-bit conscious mind, if you're engaged in cognitive listening, you process the literal vocabulary. The brain hears the words, "I am fine," accepts the data as factual, and moves on to the next topic. It's a highly efficient way to avoid emotional labor.
It's text message communication in real life. But the embodied traveler doesn't just listen with their auditory cortex, they listen with their entire biological supercomputer. And the biological mechanism for this is called neuroception.
Neuroception is a critical component of polyvagal theory. It is the nervous system's capacity to scan the environment and the people within it to assess cues of safety or danger, completely beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. It's how mammals survive.
So when your friend sits down and says, "I'm fine," your neuroception is rapidly scanning the other 11 million bits of data in the room. You're picking up on the fact that their shoulders are slumped forward, protecting their chest. You notice that their breathing is trapped high in their clavicle. You register the slight asymmetrical tension in their jaw.
You actually feel a resonant heaviness in your own chest just sitting across from them.
The 40-bit script says, "I'm fine," but the 11 million bit reality says, "I am overwhelmed, exhausted, and barely holding it together."
And because the embodied person receives the full, uncompressed broadcast, they have the capacity to respond to the reality, not the script. They can look at their friend and say, "You are telling me you're fine, but your whole body looks exhausted. You look like you're carrying a massive weight."
You bypass the superficial social armor and speak directly to their nervous system. This creates immediate, profound intimacy because their body finally feels seen. But the impact of embodiment goes far beyond just being observant. The text introduces the science of co-regulation.
This is where we realize that our nervous systems are essentially Wi-Fi routers. We are constantly, continuously broadcasting our internal state to everyone in the room.
Wait, really? Like an actual signal?
Yes, effectively. If a person walks into a room who is highly dysregulated, say a boss who is furious and erratic, they broadcast a chaotic, high-stress, sympathetic frequency. Even if they don't yell, everyone in the room feels their chest tighten. The team's nervous systems automatically begin to sync with the threat level of the most dysregulated person.
Oh, for sure. We've all experienced that toxic contagion.
But the magnificent flip side of this biology is that it works in the other direction. When an integrated person, someone who is fully embodied, breathing diaphragmatically, anchored in the reality of the present moment, enters a chaotic room, they broadcast a massive, stable, regulated signal.
Because humans are biologically wired to seek safety through co-regulation, the fragmented, anxious nervous systems of the people in that room will unconsciously begin to entrain to that calm signal. Your slow heart rate literally signals to their vagus nerve that it's safe to downregulate.
Just by existing fully in your body, you act as a biological anchor. And the texts point out that this regulatory effect has a massive ripple radius. It extends up to 3 degrees of separation.
3 degrees.
Yeah. If you maintain your center and help co-regulate a stressed colleague, that colleague goes home and naturally co-regulates their partner, who goes to the grocery store and interacts calmly with the cashier.
It reveals that the pursuit of embodiment is not self-indulgence. It is a biological responsibility to the ecosystem you inhabit. Your nervous system is a public utility.
And to demonstrate the absolute devastation that occurs when leaders entirely reject this interconnected reality, when they retreat into the rigid illusions of the 40-bit mind and ignore the relational field entirely, the text provides a massive, tragic historical analysis.
Right. And diving into this historical example, we are strictly analyzing the mechanisms of perception and strategy as laid out in the source materials. We are looking at the disastrous architectural consequences of rejecting the raw data of reality.
The fundamental argument the text makes is that the Axis military strategy in World War II was fatally compromised from the inside by the illusion of supremacy. Supremacy is the ultimate, rigid 40-bit script. It's a cognitive fiction that declares the inherent inferiority of the opponent, regardless of the physical facts on the ground.
Hitler's command structure was entirely disembodied from the reality of the field. The 40-bit ideological mind wrote a narrative of invincibility and flatly refused to process the 11 million-bit physical reality of their opponents.
The text highlights a specific strategic failure: the refusal to conduct empathetic research. Because the ideological script dictated that the Soviet Union was a genetically inferior, disorganized mass, the high command refused to look at the actual data. They dismissed the Soviets as a colossus of clay that would shatter instantly.
They completely ignored the massive biological and industrial reality that the Soviet Union could mobilize over 34 million soldiers and rapidly outproduce the German war machine in armor and artillery.
Similarly, the ideology dismissed the United States as a decadent, fractured democracy, entirely failing to anticipate the overwhelming, unified industrial capacity that would churn out 300,000 aircraft in a matter of years. The rigid mind refused to adapt its predictive coding to the real-world data.
The ultimate manifestation of this cognitive override was the Battle of Stalingrad. You had the physical, visceral reality of brutal winter conditions, decimated supply lines, and an opponent demonstrating unimaginable resilience. The generals on the ground who were physically in the field receiving the data pleaded to retreat and regroup.
But the disembodied command, thousands of miles away, issued rigid stand-and-die orders based entirely on pride and the script of supremacy.
They chose the hallucination over the somatic reality of the environment. And because successful navigation of any complex environment requires constant, flexible adaptation to the field, this absolute refusal of neuroception and reality testing resulted in catastrophic destruction.
It's the ultimate historical macro example of dimensional homonymy taken to its most destructive extreme. Mislabeling a highly capable, formidable reality as weak simply because the internal script demanded it.
The hallucination destroyed millions of lives because it waged war against the inescapable reality of the interconnected field. It proves that you cannot survive if you refuse to see the network you are a part of.
Bringing this profound historical lesson back to the scale of our individual lives, the mandate becomes clear. We must drop the rigid, arrogant scripts of the mind and continually tune in to the actual feedback of the relational field.
But if I apply this mandate to my daily life, I have to ask a practical question regarding co-regulation. If my nervous system is a public utility, and I am constantly picking up the dysregulation of the people around me through neuroception, doesn't that become exhausting?
That's a valid concern.
Is the goal of embodiment to take on the burden of fixing the emotional states of everyone I encounter? Because that sounds like a recipe for massive burnout.
That is a crucial distinction to make. Co-regulation is fundamentally not about taking on a burden. It is not about actively trying to fix or manipulate the emotional state of another person. It's about the physics of resonance.
But it's about being the anchor, not the rescuer.
Exactly. Let's say a family member comes to you in a state of high panic. Their 40-bit mind is spinning narratives, their breath is shallow, their system is flooded with cortisol. The disembodied response is to either match their panic getting swept away in their storm, or to try and forcefully, rationally argue them out of it, which usually just causes more friction.
You try to logic them out of a biological state, which never works.
But the embodied response is simply to hold your own frequency. You do not need to fix their narrative. You anchor your awareness in your own sensation. You deepen your own breath. You maintain your connection to the physical room. You naturally offer a profound, regulated alternative pattern.
Ah, I see.
Biologically, your nervous system is broadcasting the message, I hear your panic, but I am safe here. The room is secure. You are welcome to join me in this safety.
You just hold the stable frequency, and because their biology wants to feel safe, their nervous system will eventually tune into your broadcast. It's not an energetic drain, it's just maintaining your own structural integrity in the wind.
As we synthesize the vast architecture we've explored today,
The journey the source texts have taken us on is truly a paradigm shift. We began by recognizing the absurdity of treating our bodies like luggage. We audited the massive power of the 11 million bit supercomputer and realized how often our 40-bit CEO sabotages us.
We examine the mechanics of predictive coding and dimensional homonymy, how easily we misinterpret the body's energetic support as anxiety or panic.
We mapped how true embodiment acts as an automatic disruption to the algorithmic hooks of modern life, replacing exhausting cognitive willpower with immediate somatic feedback, the physical ouch that protects us.
We detail the precise biology of the fivefold path, utilizing sensation, breath, movement, stillness, and expression to clear the neural pathways and metabolize trapped energy.
All leading to the realization of saturated synergization, the coffee cup moment, eliminating the quarter-second cognitive delay to achieve pure, non-dual participation in our own lives, even amidst the chaos of a subway commute.
And ultimately, we scale this internal resonance out to the relational field, recognizing that our capacity for neuroception and co-regulation is the antidote to the rigid, destructive illusions of cognitive override and supremacy.
As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering concept from the text, a thought to mull over as you step back into your day. The sources call it the legacy of practice.
It is a beautiful culmination of the network theory we've discussed.
The text suggests that you will never fully comprehend the cascades of cultural and biological evolution that your personal integration creates. When you take the time to regulate your own nervous system in the morning, when you do the quiet, unglamorous work of feeling your feet on the floor and breathing into your belly, you change the field.
The stressed colleague you silently co-regulate in a morning meeting goes home that evening with a slightly higher capacity for patience. They respond calmly to their frustrated child instead of snapping. That child goes to school the next day with a regulated nervous system, capable of learning and cooperating.
Your private, internal breakthrough in a messy kitchen becomes a public anchor for an entire network by the afternoon. Your mastery of your own biology becomes a profound, invisible service to humanity, compounding across time in ways you will never witness.
So the invitation the texts leave us with is incredibly practical.
Don't wait for a meditation retreat. Today, right now, install what the text calls a threshold song, or a physical anchor. It can be incredibly simple. Decide that every time you place your hand on a doorknob, you will take one full, conscious breath. Or every time you sit down in your car, you will physically feel the weight of your body in the seat before turning the key.
Create a habit of checking the dashboard.
Exactly. The next time you feel that sharp internal contraction, the next time your 40-bit mind tries to convince you that an email is a predator and you need to panic, don't force the door. Don't fight the narrative. Drop into the tissue. Check the 11 million bit supercomputer. You don't have to drag yourself through life like a broken suitcase anymore. You can finally sit in the driver's seat, stop fighting the algorithm, and just flow with the room.
Thank you for joining us in the architecture today.
Keep exploring. We'll be right here when you're ready to dive back in.